All right, we are live. Welcome back, everyone, to the another episode of Christianity Original Podcast. My name is Cam. I have Mark and Grace with me. Hey, guys.
Hey,
All right, in our last few episodes, we have been focusing on the age of restoration, aka the kingdom of God. When we pray, "Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven," this is what Jesus is talking about. He asks us to pray for God's kingdom to come to the earth so that His will may be done here. And in a series of episodes, we've been kind of brainstorming scriptures and thinking about how that age of restoration will look like. Because in Acts 3rd chapter 20 and 21, Peter gives a great speech, and in that speech he talks about how when Jesus returns, there will be a times of restoration of all things. And like that is essentially described in graphic detail by all the prophets in the Bible. That's what Peter says. So there's a lot of interesting stuff about this age of restoration that Jesus will bring when he returns to the earth with his kingdom. And this is a topic that, unfortunately, in many mainstream churches is not discussed. And this was actually Jesus' main message in his 3.5 year ministry. So we are happy here to discuss a lot more on this topic. And in today's episode, I want to focus on health and well-being. Like, what do you guys think is the state of health, human health, under the empires of men throughout history? What has been this state of it? And then we can discuss about how it will be in God's kingdom, how it will be restored as part of the restoration of all things. So let me pose the first question. What do you guys think well-being means in a world governed by empires of men? How is today's society, or how has historically our societies defined well-being as, or health, someone in good health as? And do you guys agree with it?
well, I mean, as far as well-being is concerned, we usually think of like someone who's being happy, someone who has, well, to be a little bit more specific, like family with kids and like social standing within the community. And there's a lot of stuff attached to that as external signifiers. Usually these are external things, right? Like, do you have, a home with a white picket fence, for instance, the American dream, as an example of that.
Yeah. And I want to narrow the focus a bit more on like well-being defined in terms of our physical and mental health, right? And when I look at how well-being is usually defined, happiness is one metric, and also productivity, right? Like usually the productivity of different nations are measured, and people are usually treated as commodities, right? Like it's like disposable commodities.
Sure, your worth is only in how much you can contribute to your society.
Yeah. And that's how our bodies are seen. Yeah.
For what it's worth, the reason I kind of indicated I brought in like outside indicators is that I don't think that man's empires actually cares about the person's actual well-being. What they want is something to point to say, see, this person has well-being. Right. And so that oftentimes is connected to, and the reality of the situation is that external signifier becomes a sort of way for people who are not well to hide their unwellness, right? And so it's a way to kind of blend into the environment that disallows them from actually experiencing their unwellness, if you will, and getting relief for it, instead hiding that as a facade. So I would connect that in that regard. And then you also mentioned like what health means. So when we think of health, we think of, okay, someone who has, functional limbs, that has all of their faculties, that hasn't had any major illnesses. So, someone, for instance, who had cancer as a child, that would essentially preclude them from that category, even if later in life, again, they might appear to be well. So I would say any kind of flaw in any deviation from the perceived norm would be considered unhealthy.
Yeah. And the different way to phrase that question is how do man's empires see human bodies as, or human minds as, right? And you can think about like how it, in one way, it is seen as the labor workforce. That's all there is, and that's where the productivity metric comes from. And there are other industries that are built around health, right? Like the diet industry or the pharmaceutical industries, like all kind of obviously out there to, the fitness industry, all out there to kind of make a profit. But obviously some of them help people as well. And like you could also see this in comparison with how God's kingdom will respond to the health crisis, so to speak. How like God, and we can even go back to the Old Testament times to see how God dealt with health, what were the rules of the society that he wanted to kind of form with the small group of test group of people called the Israelites. And we look at like things like the Sabbath rest, like human dignity that was made as something of paramount importance. Because even when you look at the Sabbath rest, that was a revolutionary command, right? Like that the body needs rest, your mind needs rest in order for you to be healthy. And like this is Exodus 20 verses 9 and 10. 6 days you shall labor, but the seventh you got to stop. Like you got to take rest, take a day off, right? And obviously in modern times, we take that as something for granted, the weekend. But that was not the case for many centuries, right, in human history.
And if we're not careful, we're going to lose it again. Yeah, and even in the modern era, that it was, people fought with blood, sweat, and tears to get us that weekend. So it wasn't something that came easy.
Yeah, absolutely. And the God of the Bible was the inventor of the weekend. He was the creator of the weekend, right? And he mandated that weekend. And when we see the contrast, right, the empires of men, they are always about driving relentless productivity, right? Because people's bodies and minds are seen as commodities. Rest actually is a rebellion to them. Somebody is taking rest means they're losing their profit that day. But in God's society, or the society that God wants, Sabbath is essentially a right? And it's essentially his way of telling people that you are valuable, your body is valuable, your mind is valuable, and you need to renew it, you need to restore it, and reclaim it, right? Grace, do you have any thoughts around this?
Yes. I've known people who would constantly say the adage, survival of the fittest, life is survival of the fittest, and if you're not fit, you're going to be left behind. I just took that to be true. I mean, it seemed like common sense. Like I saw what was praised around me, people who they fit every metric, straight A's, always right. It's what I idolized. It's not until like recently that I've really reevaluated it and all of that, and how that's just perpetuation of the Roman Empire. I never thought of it that way. I thought these people just had my best interest in heart, and if I didn't follow that kind of path, I would be left behind. And this just brings me to this quote about how you can't love God and the world at the same time. I mean, we can't say, oh, we love God, and then idolize these kind of, I guess, societal structures that tell us, oh, you're only as good as what you make, and all of that. Brief tangent, but I just wanted to bring that up.
No,
No, it's
that's, I
just
mean, it's connected to culture. I mean, we look right now and you can see a lot of if you've heard the term grind set, right? So instead of mindset, they take the term grind. So you have a lot of, with the advent of a lot of these apps like Uber or any of the other kind of like part-time gig type apps, people will push that as a way to like fill in the gaps between your main job, if you will. Or in some cases, people will just make that their entire job and just like constantly be on those apps and, maybe push for like just a couple hours of sleep a night kind of thing. And it's this kind of cultural movement that is obviously unhealthy.
yeah. And Grace, you brought up survival of the fittest, right? And that's essentially borrowed from the evolution theory, right? Like that's how people say things have evolved in the earth and in the universe, and that they take that concept and immediately apply to our day-to-day society as well, human society, and that creates a lot of mental stress, anxiety,
Absolutely.
right? Like from childhood, right? From childhood, it affects children's brains, and it gives them nightmares. Like I remember, I used to have nightmares because I in the way the place I grew up, there was a ranking system, right? And you have to get if you get the first rank, and I think that's a great honor in all the subjects. So I think in the third grade, I once got the first rank, and after that, it became a matter of defending my reputation, and I wanted to get that first rank in every exam, right? So that's my whole education shifted towards that purpose instead of actually getting educated.
It also sounds like it moved away from like something that was grandiose, that is to say something like an honor to get that point, to something that was then expected of you.
Yeah. So and that competition, and it goes back to what Grace said, right? The survival of the fittest. So you had to be the first rank, you had to defeat everybody and be there, and only then, like, you are going to be, getting a good job or set yourself up for a good career. And you know what? That gave me nightmares. I even still have nightmares.
Me
Sometimes.
too.
Some days I woke up and I'm like, oh, I'm not prepared well enough for the exam, and I'm like, oh, like I graduated long back. So, and that's the mental health being affected, and it affects people. Obviously, mental health is tied closely to physical health, and all this like survival of fittest mentality kind of goes against us helping each other, learning together, right? And instead, it's like we are learning stuff to be against each other, right? And that survival of the fittest is kind of, if you look at what God grounds his entire law on, the theme of loving your neighbor as yourself, and if you look at all the commandments, one thing that keeps repeating is taking care of the vulnerable in the society. That's God's focus, right? He calls himself the defender of the fatherless, the widow, the orphan, and the foreigner, right? These four things again and again come to the view in all of the Bible. And he expects his followers to defend those categories of people, which are the vulnerable. They're not the fittest people. They are probably the worst fit people, right, for survival. And as a society, we fail in God's eyes if we don't take care of them. So this whole mindset of the survival of the fittest goes against the very essence of what the God of the Bible wants us to do. And that has spoiled our health, because like we operate in that mode, and it affects our physical health, it affects our mental health right from childhood, right? I think that's the saddest part of it all.
Yeah, that doesn't even get into all the myriad of ways in which there are so many elements of our lives that we have no idea how it affects our health. I mean, right now we're looking at, in the modern era, the severe concern that microplastics will have an unknowable effect. How broad, essentially unknowable in the way that we just don't know all the ways in which it will mess us up. I mean, we can look at recently, I think it was like the 1980s, lead was outlawed from gasoline, from paints, and a whole bunch of different things. But until that point, it was everywhere, right? And we can look at the kind of test scores and how people have turned out today, and kind of see the consequences of that, right? Like that significantly decreases a child's ability to learn and develop. And so all of those people are now grown up, and we see this kind of expressed in all kinds of different ways. And we also have, like, we can look around and see kind of the obesity epidemic happening, because we just didn't care about what kinds of foods we were putting into our bodies. And there was a whole industry around pushing those products and kind of covering for those products in order to facilitate like for the sugar industry worker, or sugar industry owners profiting, kind of thing. So
I was watching this series recently. I think it was on Netflix. It's called The Terror, and it's based off like a real incident that happened back in the Arctic. British, I think, explorer ships that got stuck there, and they were stranded there, and like all of them, I think, perished. But this series kind of fictionalizes what happened during the time they were stuck there. And the men in those ships, they all kind of succumbed to lead poisoning, right? Because the food, and I think that was based on the evidence they collected later, the food was stored in lead containers or whatnot, which had a coating, and it seeped into the food because the contractor at that time, that contractor bid the lowest price, and they gave the tender to that contractor. And this lead was seeping into the food, and these men were eating because that's the only source of food.
Crazy.
And they started going, crazy, right? Like it affects
Also,
your mind. Yeah.
Also, I would like to point out that the reason why, for instance, that lead and paint is a problem is because lead is actually quite tasty. A lot of people don't realize this because most of us have never actually eaten lead, for good reason. But yeah, it actually is really sweet, which is why children eating lead paint chips was a problem. But also not just the big things like that, but also little things like how we sit. I know there was like a kind of focus on standing desks for a while, and then as a healthy alternative to sitting down in a desk for 8 hours a day, as many of us do. But even that has been shown to be a little bit, standing and not moving around is not really that great for your spine either. And so now there are like hybrid desks and all of these little things, but like ultimately we're putting people in situations in which they're really not meant to be for an extended period of time, the work day. And it's just not like, you've also got like fluorescent lights and the effects on the human body. And we've got all these LED lights in all of our environments when we sleep, and that's not good for us either. So, I mean, it's just everywhere. There's no escaping it.
And Mark, you touched upon a couple of things, right? One is like corporations essentially groups of people, they kind of putting the profit above kind of the needs of the society, or like loving your neighbor as yourself.
Sure.
And that's the lead poisoning and like all kinds of pollution that happens, which affects human health, right? Even today we are in the middle of a climate change crisis, and we can talk a lot about that. But that, again, goes back to the survival of the fittest operating at a corporate level, where like every corporation has to show that their profits are growing every year from the earlier year, and they are finding more ways to kind of make money, even if it affects your fellow humans' health. And that is how the empires of men have set up our societies, and that's a major problem affecting our health. And the other one you pointed about was the availability of unhealthy food, right? It might not be polluted food, but it's like a lot of sugary food, like high sugar, high carb, and I remember like there was somebody who had a quote saying like earlier in earlier centuries the poor people were all kind of thin and they were famished, but in modern society there is a different problem. The poor people are become obese, right?
Yep.
Because they are being bombarded with like really high carb food, which is the cheapest food. Yeah, which is cheap to make. And all this like fast food chains, they're out there like churning out all this cheap food and making humans really, really unhealthy.
Wow.
So one way or the other, like people are getting screwed because of the food industry. And I remember seeing a documentary about food production. That itself can turn off your appetite. So it's the industrial level food production, right? So yeah, and if we trace it all back, like I think I was reading this book by Yuval Noah Harari, right, *Sapiens*, and that in that book he talks about the tragedy of agriculture, what agriculture brought on humanity. Before agriculture, we were all hunter-gatherers, and we had a healthy life. And actually, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say it's funny that you bring that book up because the book that I'm currently reading points out a number of ways in which Noah Harari it makes oversimplifications about that kind of dynamic between the two. But I would agree with what you're getting at, which is that what we had, even in early agriculture, though, there was still a lot of mobility involved in that. And I think where that split happens is the industrialization of farming, right? Like, I think generally we probably could have gotten by as a society and stayed healthy in the advent of, because, I mean, have you ever had an heirloom tomato, for instance, versus, a factory farm type tomato today? The difference is just striking. The flavor, for instance, of a heirloom tomato and the nutrient content of an heirloom tomato, and the same can go for any different species of fruit and vegetable, anything that we can grow, right? So it's this you're essentially stripping out anything resembling the original product, or I say product, like any the original thing that grew and that was used for nutrients, and you're making it so that way you can ship it long distances, so that way you can store it in produce aisles for weeks at a time.
Yeah.
It's just not.
And I think we could also devote a separate episode for the food kind of industry itself, or like how we think food will be in the kingdom, because that's also an interesting topic. But just to go back to the point I was trying to make, is the hunter-gatherer society, according to Harari, was very active, and it was also very communal, right? People took care of each other because that's the only way you will survive. It's not a kind of the survival of the fittest type society. It was a different type of society. But again, there could be people who might have different views about it. But they had a very diverse diet and they ate only when they were hungry, right? Today we have this 3 meals concept, morning, noon, and night, which again was not necessarily like the practice in earlier societies. So there is a lot to say about how the dieting and what kind of diet we consumed and what kind of fitness or physical activity we did.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and to your point, though, I think because we can look at for instance, there are villages and towns in Europe that their goal was they built the towns around walking, right? And that's what you can find a lot of that focus in Europe, generally speaking, like a desire to move away from car culture, or not even include car culture, because a lot of these towns were built before cars were even a thing. And then also inversely, we see in America where car culture was something that was pushed by industry, such that we saw a degradation of all kinds of communities that had developed absent the centralization of cars that were healthy to live in, right? So when we talk about hunter-gatherers, for instance, I think what you're really getting at is the mobility angle, right? So there are a bunch of different things that are happening in what you ascribe to hunter-gatherer societies that aren't mutually exclusive from an agricultural society. It's just more often than not, that's the place where we see it easily because of the environments in which hunter-gatherer societies lived. I would posit that we can see even this kind of thing happen in early agricultural societies because of the lack of industrialization. It might have only been like a small types of farms, like maybe you and I, what most people would have, like a garden that was probably be comparable to a farm in early prehistory or in late prehistory. More recently.
And I think mobility is not just the only aspect that Harari discusses, right? But mobility is obviously an important aspect. And even today, they call these blue zones across the world, right, where people live the longest and the healthiest. Mm-hmm. And I think the Mediterranean is one of those blue zones. And one main reason is people do a lot of walking. The societies or towns and villages are designed for walking. Mm-hmm. And that is where people are their healthiest. So, Grace, do you have any thoughts around this topic?
Yes, and I want to clarify to the audience, when I said you can't love God and the world, I don't mean creation itself. I mean the world is in how society is structured that's against God's will. That's what I mean by you cannot love God and the world at the same time. And back to what you're talking about, with all of that said, a lot of people tend to view health issues as an individual problem. We've established that it's not, but there's this whole idea that if someone has issues with their health, it's their fault, it's their responsibility. And it's just one way for worldly institutions to evade responsibility.
I think that's an important point you are bringing up. I remember there were talk shows where people are like, you are not eating healthy, you are obese, it's your fault, right? Mm-hmm. But they're not thinking through it, right? That person obviously cannot afford healthy food. That's the society we have created. And we also bombard every person with carbs almost everywhere we go. That's the easiest available food, right? Most easily accessible. And all our food industry is geared toward kind of conditioning our brains to eat carbs, right?
Wow.
And then we start blaming individual people, like it's your fault that you are eating the wrong food. Why don't you eat healthy food? Whereas healthy food is not easily accessible, it's not affordable, right? And as a society, we have failed in that aspect, and we don't take responsibility.
And sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
There are television shows, I'm not going to mention the name for obvious reasons, that they exploit and humiliate obese people into extreme exercise diets. And I'm not sure if it's still on TV, maybe because of, I guess, with the issue with body shaming, but it's disgusting.
Yeah.
Well, to the point, I think also that you both are getting at, there's no controlling there's no way for any of us to rewrite our genetics. And to blame an individual for doing something that is, let's be frank here, sugar has not been available for most of human history in anywhere near the quantities that we can get access to it today, right? You may get a teeny tiny bit of sugar in some fruits and some plants, like root vegetables, for instance, occasionally throughout history. You were lucky. Honestly, sugar was a luxury throughout most of human history. It wasn't, again, until the industrialization of sugarcane farming, which in and of itself was also tied to a whole bunch of practices that are connected to the ways in which man's empire functions, slavery being the one that I'm thinking of. But also, so if your body understands that sugar means nutrition, and your body has, for most of human history, experienced famine after famine, or there's no such thing as food stability for 99.9% of human history. And then all of a sudden we have this abundance, right? Because we do produce way more food. I think it's something like we produce some food for, what is it? Something like 11 billion people. And there's only 8 billion people on the planet, and yet somehow 3 billion people are starving to death. So we have not only this abundance, but yeah, there's the fact of the matter is our bodies are just incapable of fighting against these urges.
That's the reptilian. Yeah. That's the reptilian brain, right? As soon as it sees sugar, it thinks that it has to grab everything and eat it, so that because it has not been available at all for centuries. We are wired that way. Yeah. And now society is making that available abundance everywhere. And so and going back to the theme that Grace was talking about, that it's not an individual failure, it's a societal, communal failure.
Very much.
And I think even mental health, right? Like even in Jesus' times during the Roman Empire, and this is one of the things that Jesus did a lot, right? Healing, right? He was healing physical and mental issues that people were facing. And the way, if you look at the first century language that was used to describe mental health issues, was kind of being possessed, right? That's how people identified, kind of described mental health issues. And there is this famous incident where there is this person who is actually living among the tombstones, right? And he's obviously a pariah, an outcast, and mentally disturbed. And when Jesus meets him, there is an interesting conversation that happens, which is obviously a coded conversation written down in the Gospels. It has a lot of hidden transcript against the Roman Empire. And obviously the people think that he's possessed. And when Jesus talks to him, it's as if he's addressing the demon inside him. And the demons give their name. Do you guys know what that name is?
If I recall, it was Legion.
Yeah. And what is your what are your thoughts around that name?
Well, my recollection of that event was of that story in the Bible was like Jesus asked the man his name, or the demon his name. The name said Legion. For we are many. So this idea would be multiply, many.
And Legion
things or entities, if you will.
And Legion is obviously a key code word in that conversation. And Legion means it's like a battalion of the Roman army, right? Mm-hmm. And it was an occupied territory. And in that town, I forget the name of the town near which this incident happens, there was a Roman legion stationed there in the occupied territory of Israel at that time. Israel was occupied by the Roman Empire. And what we can understand from this coded conversation is this man has been brutalized in some nature by the Roman legion, and his mental health is disturbed because of that. And then we see that Jesus kind of helps him. And then it becomes an interesting incident, because the demons then go into the pigs. They ask for permission to go into the pigs, which are nearby. And then the pigs, after the demons go into them, they fall into the ocean. And then the town becomes angry against Jesus because the pigs are gone, and they drive Jesus out of the town. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, to reinforce the kind of coded language perspective that you're talking about, to reinforce that, I think there are two places in which the story, if I recall correctly, is written about. And in each place, neither of those two towns are actually anywhere near the water. In fact, there's several, it sounds like there's several, in some cases, I think in one case it was like tens of miles away. And so obviously this is code for something else, right? Something else is happening in this story that's not really anything to do with what seems to be.
And the pigs, essentially the town's farmers, right? The village farmers, they are using the pigs to feed the Roman legion. Right.
Okay,
and
then
that's their trade, right? That's how they make their living. Obviously, now these people's livelihood is closely tied with the empire. Now the empire has taken over that town, and the Roman legion is the main kind of company in town, right? Where people they are all employed by the Roman legion now, and they are using the pigs, rearing pigs to feed the Roman army, Roman legion, which has brutalized this man who was once part of that society. And this goes back, and then when Jesus heals this man, right, but it affects, which in turn affects the people's livelihood, because it was against the empire, they then drive out Jesus. They don't want Jesus to heal them, right? They are choosing the Roman Empire there. Right, they still want to feed the occupying empire, who is oppressing them and brutalizing their own people. So, unfortunately, they choose the Roman Empire. And I brought this up because what Grace was mentioning, right? It's a collective responsibility. So the society, that town, really doesn't care about the health of its own citizens, right? And it's in turn favoring the empire that is kind of pressing its boots on their heads and keeping them unhealthy, both physically and mentally.
Well, this all ties kind of back to the theme that we've been discussing relating to man's empires, which is that it puts us in conflict with one another, in competition with one another, such that we are just incapable of caring about anyone else and their health, right? And so when we see someone else that is suffering, and in our minds, if remedying that suffering will put even an iota of risk against us of losing our health, we automatically make the decision to be selfish, right? Because in for one reason or another, I'm sure people can come up with all kinds of justifiable reasons. Like, you might say, oh, last year we had a rough year and I almost couldn't feed my kids, so I need to be diligent this year. That sounds like a good reason. But ultimately at the end of the day, it's still we are in competition with one another, such that that we are not able to help, or I say not able to, but like we're basically the empire pits us against one another.
Yeah, and that's why we are all guilty, and that's why we all die. The wages of sin is death, right? So that's essentially where we are all going to. Grace, did you have anything else on this topic that you wanted to talk about?
It's related, but a hindrance I could see during the kingdom. With curing diseases like coronavirus, cancer, all these major diseases, one issue that I could see that we need to get over is across different health departments, there's like these silos where like there's competition, and plus there's like kind of pride and ego among and within different departments, right? So for example, some people don't want to share an accomplishment with another colleague because it kind of undermines, how exceptional the accomplishment is, right? But they'll have to learn not to be so prideful. I don't know how it's going to happen, but
that to your point, that competition exists at every level, and in ways that we aren't even really aware of.
Yeah.
So when you talk about that element of like wanting to share credit for any given accomplishment, like even that structure is influenced by the empire, right? So it's just another facet of what we are talking about today, which is like the ways in which our, health in this environment affects our bodies, but it affects everything. I mean, there's no way to. It's a huge web of interconnectivity in all the ways in which we are in competition with one another as opposed to cooperation. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's. Yeah, we kind of touched on some of the ways in which we would overcome that in the kingdom in the past few weeks. Now, I suspect the next part of that equation is, well, I'll let you finish, Ken.
Yeah. So, and Grace is discussing the healthcare aspect of it, right? Who are the healthcare providers? And that could include doctors, nurses, and the pharmaceutical companies, researchers. And it's all obviously a lot is geared towards making a quick buck, right? Like making profits and all that. But a lot of good things also have happened in those industries where people make selfless decisions and kind of make it freely available and all that.
Insulin. I can think of insulin, the discovery of insulin as an example of that. The two patent creators of insulin basically they didn't patent it essentially. And,
but it happens in very rare cases, right? Most of it is geared towards making profit. And the insurance companies, of course, right? Like, so the main way they make profit is by denying claims, right? So it's, the whole thing, it leaves a bad taste in the mouth, right? People feel frustrated, especially when you are going through a health crisis. And that is when you have to negotiate with the middleman on what kind of care you can get and what you are eligible for and what you are not eligible for. It's terrifying. It's a lot of trauma, unnecessary trauma. Yeah.
Well, there is also another interesting thing that happens, at least in this, I can only speak to the American healthcare system and I think that is what many people look at when they think of a quote healthcare system that doesn't actually care for the people that have access to it. So there's something interesting, and I think this ties in with our desire to be. So one other interesting thing that this system does is it dangles a carrot of advancing within that hierarchy, the social hierarchy and the political hierarchy in front of people. So it tells you, hey, you can be this, you can be the billionaire, you can be the king, if you will. And that message is so pervasive, and I'll connect this to mental health especially, is that many people in America demand cutting-edge healthcare, that if we actually dealt with some of the underlying issues wouldn't be necessary. So for instance, we see what's that one drug that just came out, or not just came out, but it's been around for a while, Ozempic. I'm thinking of Ozempic as an example, right? It's an extremely expensive drug and it's meant to treat obesity, but realistically we're looking at a band-aid solution because it doesn't actually address the root cause of obesity. It just gives a few people who are willing to pay gobs of money access to a way to shortcut, basically have their cake and eat it too, essentially, right? It's this indulgent kind of icon, and that is quite a bit of American healthcare. We want the cutting edgest drugs, the best, the new stuff, instead of focusing our efforts on taking care of people that are most vulnerable. That is to say, people that have health problems that need to be solved in a way that they can't solve through better, a society that has better lifestyle choices available to people. That is to say, where better lifestyle choices are the norm, we have this competition for the best and brightest. So I would say that the insurance industry is kind of a consequence of that environment, not so much now, not to say I'm not trying to justify the things that the healthcare industry does, but
and there's also like other types of countries where like there is no availability of healthcare for the poor, right?
Exactly.
And if there is healthcare available, it's done as some kind of charity where the quality is really bad, where there is lack of kind of hygienic hospitals and all that type of stuff. And especially when it comes to like the treatment of elderly people, if somebody is above 70 or something, there are countries where like the doctors are like, you're done. Like you're done with your life. Why are you here? Like just go, like die, right? That's the response people usually give to kind of elderly people, and they kind of even don't care about taking the time to figure out what's wrong with that person and how they can help them. So there is a lot of kind of problems in the healthcare as well. So having discussed all this, right, I think we probably spoke a lot about how
The problems.
societies handle health, and probably it's been a depressing episode so far, right? I want to discuss a little bit more about how we think Jesus and the kingdom he will bring to the earth will handle this, right? And I want to start with an interesting passage from the New Testament. This is Matthew 11, verses 1 to 4. After Jesus had finished instructing his 12 disciples, he went on from there to teach and preach in the towns of Galilee. When John, the Baptist, who was in prison, heard about the deeds of the Messiah, he sent his disciples to ask him, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?" Jesus replied, "Go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor." Obviously, Jesus like never answers any questions directly, right? But he gives really appropriate responses, and it's interesting to kind of see that to prove that he was the Messiah, which obviously John the Baptist should not have had any doubts about because he was the one who introduced Jesus as the Messiah. But now John has some doubts, but Jesus, in response to that doubt, this is the proof that he's giving, which is a lot focused on health, right? The restoration of health and well-being. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, people who have sicknesses are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. So I thought that was interesting. So, and when go ahead, Mark.
Well, in relation to that, I'm curious because there are also times where Jesus refuses to do any healing, and I wonder what was happening. Like, so there's two things happening, right? So Jesus is healing people. Like, what is he? We see that he's healing these external illnesses because it's obvious when someone's blind or it's obvious when someone is lame. And then we also have the inverse of that, which is like these internal things. Even in the case of like the woman who was had been bleeding for like 30 years. And then we also have, so like, what is it that he was healing them like? So we from, that is to say, what was really happening there? And then also, would there have been any other way for Jesus to display the kingdom as effectively as he did?
Sorry, what do you mean Jesus refused to heal?
No. There were times. Well, there were times. Were there not times where people would ask for a sign, and he would criticize them as
but that was never about healing. They were asking. Not? Yeah, no, that was more about they wanting him to do party tricks.
Oh, okay. So what kinds of party tricks were they, like kind of like the water to wine thing, or what other party tricks did Jesus do?
Walk on water. Like he did a lot of. He didn't do any party tricks, obviously.
Well, but no, I'm like, oversimplifying it.
Yeah. So walking on water, like turning water into wine, like a lot of other stuff. But they didn't put a sick person in front of him and asked him to heal him.
Oh, okay,
and
sure.
he never refused to heal anybody, right? Like he always healed people. And the interesting thing that we see in the ways he heals people, right? And I think there is even a couple of incidents where when he heals blind people, he's almost going through a process, right? He takes mud, like puts it on their eyes. Is as if he's like a classic healer, like a doctor performing some stuff, right, to heal the physical body. And obviously, there are places where he's not physically present, but he heals remotely. But there are hints given, because the centurion, which is the incident I'm talking about, he comes to Jesus and asks him to heal, I think, his daughter. And Jesus is like, okay, let me come to your house. And he is like, you don't need to come there. I have people who do what I tell them, and they go do it. How about yourself, right? And Jesus appreciates his faith, which means what is implied is Jesus has people who can go in person and do that stuff for
it's his servant.
So that means Jesus also in other places talks about angels who can do the work he commands them to do. So the point I'm trying to make is there is a lot of physical kind of procedures that Jesus employs when he heals people. And even when we talk about the age of restoration, that is the times of restoration of all things, when he returns, like there are prophecies, right? Isaiah 35, 5, 6, which says, then will the eyes of the blind be opened, the ears of the deaf unstopped, then will the lame leap like a deer, and the mute tongue shout out for joy. And the same Isaiah in chapter 33, verse 24 says, no one will say I am ill. So there are a lot of prophecies that talk about people's illnesses and disabilities getting healed in the kingdom, both mental and physical. And the prophets get very kind of graphic about or very poetic about all this stuff. And we also see Jesus making that as one of the primary evidence of him being the Messiah, that he's a healer of people. Like it's interesting to see that. And obviously he did not heal everybody out there when he was here. He was giving a taste of what he's going to do when he returns on a global scale. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say the reason I asked that question is when he was healing someone, is there a way to look at that and understand that it was obviously more than just the physical healing that he was performing, but also healing the so when someone was lame, for instance, right, they were then subject to the people around them's mercy as to how much they would be willing to be given, because again we're talking about an empire in which survival of the fittest was the central pillar, or one of the central pillars at least, and so anyone who wasn't fit was seen as at the mercy of everyone else around them. Right. So we also can see that same kind of thing happening with the what was that pool of water and the lame man that was, or the completely paralyzed man that was lying next to it. Right. When Jesus asks him, does he want to be healed? And he says, but I have no one to get me down into the water. So what was I posit what was happening is he was healing also the damage that the Roman Empire had done to them. That is to say, it had thoroughly subjugated them in ways that we just, someone who has all their faculties, let's say doesn't really understand, right? So I mean
Yeah. And the empire
didn't have guide dogs back then.
The empire marginalizes the sick.
Yeah.
Right? The empires of men, they marginalize the sick, they make them outcasts. But what we see is Jesus centering them, right? Like this is essentially his definition of somehow the definition of the Messiah itself is that he's healing the broken. He's healing people who are marked as outcasts. He's bringing back the people who are marginalized, and he's restoring them, right, and reintegrating them into the community. So it's not just a personal physical recovery. It's also more as a communal recovery. And he spends a lot of time doing this, like in this ministry. It was essentially, apart from his preaching, this was his main thing, right? So,
Sure.
and when he comes back, obviously, we know that the dead will be raised, right? Which is also something he includes in the definition of the Messiah in his response, that the Messiah will raise the dead. And obviously he gave us a taste with Lazarus and that little girl, but we also know that he's going to raise everyone back alive when he returns. So 1 Corinthians 15, 21 and 22.
Yeah.
So when people come back alive, how does restoration look like? How he's will people, the one question is, will people come back with their sicknesses and weaknesses in their bodies and minds? Because there is also a theory that we'll just all come back with wings and we will just fly around in the clouds.
We'll be
right?
Perfect bodies, all the same, skin color, all Adonais and Adonesses, so to speak. We'll have, perfectly toned bodies and muscles, and we'll be able to lift big stones and stuff like that. Yeah, and ultimately, that's really what I want to get at when it comes to this idea of healing in the kingdom, which is that will it be like when we talk about healing? Is that's we can certainly, I think we can agree, for instance, something like something terminal or something completely debilitating such that the person is unable to function, right? Let's say there are diseases out there. One, I had a teacher in high school that her daughter and son-in-law were like health food nuts. And I guess there's some disease that happens in infants born to parents like that, such that like the daughter had very beautiful hair but died shortly after birth. And for I don't know the exact name of the illness, but that was how it was described to me. And so we see certainly these illnesses that are terminal, such that I certainly think in order for them to continue living in the kingdom, those things would need to be healed. But you're right. What does that look like? Is it such that as they're resurrected, we have access to advanced medical technology that allows us to immediately heal them of any terminal illness or debilitating illness, whether that be chronic pain or...
But hold on, I want to pose a question even before we discuss that. Will people be resurrected with their disabilities and illnesses?
Well, that's kind of what I'm touching on.
No, I want to hear the answer to that. Like, what do you guys think, right? Will people be resurrected with their illnesses and disabilities, or will they be resurrected without any of the illnesses they had or the disabilities they had? Grace, what do you think?
I am not entirely sure, to be honest. I mean, to be resurrected in perfect bodies all of a sudden doesn't make much sense. It sounds like magical thinking, but then again, I'm not entirely sure.
I mean, we can look at some of the samples that Jesus gave us, right? Like when Lazarus was brought back alive, for instance, was he with a perfect body? Like, did he not have any? Let's say he had back pain before. After the resurrection, did he not have back pain? These are interesting questions to ask, right? Obviously, he lived in the first century, so we don't know much else about him, what happened to him after. Obviously, he died. Poor guy, he probably is one of the couple of human beings who have already died twice. So, everybody else dies once, but Lazarus died twice.
Sorry, well, I was going to say, I just until recently. That is to say that we certainly can, if we look at the medical industry now, it does certainly seem like there have been instances of people dying and then being able to be resuscitated in the strictest sense of the term, but certainly not on the level of Lazarus.
So let's not go into that rabbit hole in this episode.
Sure. Yeah, let's not.
Yeah. But to my point, like the so far the kind of examples or the use cases we have for people coming back from the dead is Lazarus, the scriptural use cases, right? Like Lazarus and the little girl. There is no evidence that they came back with a perfect body, but also we have to keep in mind that this was just a demonstration of the resurrection that will happen in the kingdom. So it might have been a different kind of resurrection. It's just a prototype. Right? It's not the actual thing.
Well, we also talk about, like, so one of the things that we can kind of connect to is this idea that, like, Adam had access to a level of health and health that we don't have access to anymore. If you look at for the genealogical records in the Old Testament, it does seem like people lived significantly longer lives. And I think if Jesus had brought Lazarus back in, let's say, the same kind of body that Adam had access to, then it's fair to say that he would still be alive up until at least the 9th century. So
I agree. Like, I think
seem to have happened.
So you touched upon like an interesting point, right? The health at the beginning of our human existence, like since Adam, the Eden, how did health look like for Adam and Eve before the fall, right? Mm-hmm. Because we keep talking about the age of restoration, the times of restoration of all things, which means restoring it back to some earlier level, right? We had it and we screwed up and we lost it, right? Now Jesus is helping us in this kingdom restore it back ourselves to the earlier standard we had, which is always the Edenic standard. And obviously we see human beings living for centuries, right? Like I think the longest living human recorded in the Bible was Methuselah, if I remember right. And he lived for like 900 odd years, right? Almost like a millennia. So that's quite long, which means like the earliest humans, they had such a long lifespan, which means they must have been healthy, right? So what kind of technology did they have access to in Eden, which had kept them healthy, right? Even after the loss of the access to the tree of life, so to speak, the metaphorical tree of life, which again is an interesting
topic
tree
in itself.
And that also is mentioned in Revelation. Because when we see these two books, Genesis and Revelation, they have a lot of parallels, right? And I remember there is a specific verse in actually Revelation in relation to the healing, which is one of the main topics we are discussing today. So let me read from that, Revelation 22, verses 1 and 2. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, down the middle of the great street of the city. On each side of the river stood the tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. So, again, a lot of graphical, poetic language employed there. But what I see interesting here is the restoration theme, right? Back to Edenic perfection, where things were much better before we screwed it all up. And here it talks about, again, healing, which Jesus himself highlights as a key aspect of his messianic responsibilities. And here there is talk about the leaves, the fruits, like of this tree, and how the nations are going to be healed by it, and how the water of life is going to flow. And then you have the tree of life growing by the sides of that river. and people getting access to healing because of this, right? So it's a lot to take in, but I think going back to the original question I posed, I think it seems like based on all these verses, there will not be an instant kind of perfection achieved during resurrection where everybody comes back with a healthy body and mind. It's going to be a process, right? So, yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Well, because the reason I say I also agree with that, to kind of connect it back to a point I made a couple weeks ago about the potentiality of a child offering their DNA or their blood to resurrect their parents. There is some symbolism in the image of someone who made someone's life difficult because of a perceived shortcoming, whether that be a physical disability, a mental disability, or what have you, and like the process of healing that and in a selfless manner that is really hard to thumb your nose at, in the sense that like there is some that is a process by which that person can make amends while also improving the environment of the kingdom.
Yeah. Go ahead, Grace.
There's something I'd just like to remind the audience, just to clarify that being a believer now in this life will not promise us health. We're still in this fallen world. The reason I mention this is that in that Isaiah quote, no one will be ill, I've just read articles of just people misinterpreting that quote to present day context to mean that, oh, the blessing of the kingdom is yours, live in the blessing of the kingdom, oh, you rule your own body, take charge, is deeply problematic and linked to this health as wealth stuff.
Sure.
Yeah,
we can.
It's the implication. Are you saying that if somebody is ill and they're a believer, then they're not a true believer? That are you putting their faith into question? It's deeply problematic, and I've read this in many forums, and it's so frustrating.
Yeah,
it's just another example of the type of us versus them mentality that we see in the kind of all of man's empire's myths, right? Like there's this, we've talked about in the past, like the emperors would promise their subjects that they were torturing and killing, that like they, in the afterlife, things will be better for you. It's another kind of obfuscation of the fact of the reality that like that's not how God works. Jesus never turned stones into bread. He expected people to feed them. Same goes for healing. If you expect, people to be healed, you have to do that.
Yeah. And there is also an interesting verse. I think it's in James 5:16. It talks about confess your sins to one another and pray. And it goes on to say that you may be healed. And that is specifically written to the believers, right? James obviously is not talking to unbelievers. Now, does that mean like there is going to be miraculous healing available for the believers? And I think that always depends on a lot of factors, right? And mostly God works through organic processes, right? It's like that's how He creates the universe in Genesis, right? It's all organic, and that's how we also see restoration as happening. But when it comes to the very specific point that Grace you raised, I would say when it comes to believers taking care of their health, it's essentially a communal responsibility as well, where we take care of each other's mental health. We kind of protect each other, right, as a community. And that's what Israel was expected to do as a community in the Old Testament. And now the believers are the new Israel, right, the spiritual Israel. So we are expected to take care of each other mentally and physically so that we can run the race together, because we are given a mission by Jesus to proclaim this good news of the kingdom of God as a team, right? So, and that's what James is talking about. So it could be like people taking care of each other, helping each other overcome their kind of disabilities or illnesses and all that, which could end up in somebody overcoming their illnesses, right, or coping with their illness, right? So it could include any of that. But obviously, it's not like if somebody is sick, then God has cursed them. This is what the traditional Christianity's kind of view has been, and we disagree with that. Yeah.
What I meant to say, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
What I meant to say was the belief that if you're a believer now, then you'll be delivered of your illness. That's what I was more talking about, that belief.
Yeah, and that is based on some of these scriptures that comes out of the Pentecostal movement, right?
Yeah, I didn't want to be too.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I was just couching my language, but that's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, and that is essentially the miraculous powers of the Holy Spirit topic, right? Like there are, like I think 9, if I remember right, miraculous powers of the Holy Spirit described in the New Testament, which were given to the first century believers when they were starting out on their ministry towards the ends of the earth to spread Christianity. And they were granted miraculous powers, and they could speak in other languages, which is called the tongues, and they could heal people, just like Jesus was able to, and they could make personal prophecies. A lot of interesting powers were given, but the scriptures themselves say those powers will cease, and they ceased. There is no miraculous power given to any person alive today, right? Like there are people who call themselves apostles and healers and whatnot. So if we are sick, we have to go see a doctor and take care of ourselves and try to kind of get away from this industrial food industry-driven complex that Mark was talking about earlier, and eat healthy wherever possible, right? And take care of our health. That's all we can do right now. And obviously we should pray, right? Like, and I think that is a privilege we have, right? That God has given us. If we are going through a health crisis, it's important that we also pray to God to help us through it and heal us from it, right? But that doesn't mean we also stop looking out for ourselves and just ask for everything to be a miracle from God, right? I think we should do both. That's my view. Cool. I think we probably should wrap up today's episode now. And maybe this topic is such a huge topic, we should do another episode on it. What do you guys think?
Sure.
Yeah, I'd like to dig in a little bit more on what healing in the kingdom might look like, and
we didn't get a chance to.
Well, because too, and the reason I say it that way too is we certainly don't want to make it seem like we are saying that anyone who is not exactly like one idyllic person, as often is the case, we all Christianity tends to like idolize Adam as a physical form, and then everyone that deviates from that, and we want to really kind of explore what that means, in order to also make people understand that we're not saying that like because you are X thing, whether that be autistic or blind, that you are you need to get better, so to speak, right? Because that's often a very that's a very empire message, and we try to steer away from that kind of messaging as much as we can, because
the empire like discriminates and kind of makes people as outcasts. And how is the empire of God going to be different in embracing like different types of personalities, different groups of people? It's not like everybody is expected to become like instantly like a Greek god or something. That is that the goal? I don't think so, right? Like, so we can dive deep into that in our next episode. Yeah. All right. As always, it's been great discussing with both of you.
It's been a pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Grace and Mark. And till we meet again, God bless.